During the late 1970s, something evil was lurking in the north of England. A killer moved through the towns and cities, leaving fear wherever he went. His attacks were so cruel and so brutal that many people said it reminded them of the most famous killer in British history, Jack the Ripper. But this was not the 1800s. This was a new monster, a modern-day killer who would soon be known as the Yorkshire Ripper. His real name was Peter Williams Sutcliffe. He was born on June 2nd, 1946 in a market town called Bingley in West Yorkshire. Peter was the oldest son of John Sutcliffe and Kathleen Connon. As a boy, Peter seemed quiet and shy. He didn't like school very much and dropped out when he was only 15 years old. After that, he took all kinds of odd jobs. He worked as a grave digger, helping bury the dead. He worked as a funeral assistant, handling coffins and working around death every day. And then later, he trained to drive big trucks and became a lorry driver for a company in Bradford. Bit of a career change there. In 1974, Peter married his longtime girlfriend, Sonia Surma, and to the outside world, he looked like a normal man, living a normal life. But deep inside, something terrible was growing. On October 30th, 1975, the world would finally meet the Yorkshire Ripper. That night, William McCann, a 28-year-old mother of 4 from Scotland, was found dead near her home in Scott Hall, which was in Leeds. She had been hit in the head with a hammer and then stabbed 15 times in her stomach, chest, and neck. It was a horrifying crime, brutal and full of rage. Over 100 police officers were put onto the case, but right from the start, the investigation was slow and full of mistakes. The police were unfair to certain groups of people, and because of that, the Ripper had time to kill again and then again. Wilma McCann was not just a stay-at-home mother. She was separated from her husband and sometimes went out at night, leaving her oldest daughter to watch her younger siblings. At first, the police didn't know that Wilma McCann's death was the start of something much bigger. They believed her killer might have just been someone she knew, maybe a boyfriend or a neighbor, which most killings actually do involve, like, the victim knows the person. But they started digging into her personal life and found out that Wilma had dated several men after separating from her husband. Soon, rumors began to spread. The police hinted that she might have been a prostitute, even though they had no real proof. The newspapers repeated this gossip, and the story then grew out of control. Even though no one could say for sure, most people soon believed it, that Wilma McCann had been a prostitute. The truth, however, was much more complicated, and the rumor made it easier for some to just blame the victims instead of blaming the killer, which is that is where the blame takes place, right? Those people would have survived had there not been a killer. A few months later, the killer would actually strike again. This time, his victim was Emily Jackson, a 42-year-old woman from Morley, just west of Leeds. On that cold morning on January 20th, 1976, Emily's body was found at an abandoned industrial site in Leeds. The scene was even more horrifying than before. Just like with Wilma, Emily had been hit in the head with a hammer to knock her unconscious. But then the killer stabbed her over 50 times, probably using a sharpened screwdriver. As if that wasn't brutal enough, he then stomped on her body with his heavy boot. But this time, the Ripper made a mistake. When he stomped on Emily, he left behind a boot print which was on her thigh. Police then studied the print carefully and found it belonged to a size 7 Wellington boot, later identified as Dunlop Warwick model. It was the first real clue that they had about who this killer might even be. Emily Jackson lived with her husband, Sidney, and their 3 children. The family had fallen on hard times after Sidney's roofing business had failed, and desperate for money, Emily had sadly turned to prostitution to help support her family. She and her husband would drive into Leeds together in their van. Emily would meet with clients, while Sidney waited for her in a nearby bar. Even though the violence in Emily's murder was far from worse, the police quickly realized something that was fairly important. Wilma McCann and Emily Jackson had been killed by the same man. After the murder of Emily Jackson, police then started to believe that they understood the killer's dark mind. They thought the Ripper hated prostitutes, and that's why he attacked with such wild, angry violence. The way he killed was so much like Jack the Ripper from a long time ago that people grew even more afraid because it's like, oh God, this is some similarities here. And soon the newspapers had the perfect name for this new monster, the Yorkshire Ripper. For over a year, everything would then go quiet. The Ripper seemed to just vanish. People hoped the nightmare was over, but they would end up being wrong. On February 5th, 1977, the Ripper then returned. This time, his victim was Irene Richardson, a 28-year-old woman living in Chapeltown, another part of Leeds. She was found dead early in the morning. And just like the others, Irene had been hit in the head with a hammer and then stabbed again and again. But this time, the killer made another mistake. Police found tire tracks near the crime scene, tracks from a van or a medium-sized car. It was their best clue yet. They worked hard and figured out where the tire marks matched 26 kinds of cars. It seemed like a breakthrough until they realized there was over 100,000 cars that fit this list, just in West Yorkshire alone. The trail here would go cold again. Irene's story was heartbreaking. She had been homeless and struggling, and just like the others before her, she had turned to prostitution out of desperation. But the Ripper was not finished. In 1977, he became even more dangerous. Only 2 months later, on April 23rd, 1977, the Ripper attacked again, and this time he left Leeds and traveled to Bradford, about 14 kilometers away. And this time, he changed his pattern. Instead of killing outside, he murdered his victim inside of her own apartment. No one knew if this was on purpose or just by chance, but it didn't fool the police. The killer's method was the same as before. Once again, he left behind the same chilling clue, a size 7 Wellington boot print at the scene. The victim's name was Patricia Atkinson, though her friends just called her Tina. She would often visit pubs, meet clients, and then bring them back to her home. After Patricia Atkinson's murder, the police became even more sure about their theory. They believed the killer was someone who hated prostitutes, and no matter what, they refused to change their minds. Even when new evidence would present itself that showed that they could actually be wrong. That evidence came just 2 months later, on June 26th, 1977. Jane McDonald, a 16-year-old girl, was walking home in Chapeltown after a fun night of dancing with her friends. It was late, and she had missed the last bus. She couldn't find a taxi either, so she had no choice but to hoof it home. That's when the Yorkshire Ripper ended up finding her. He attacked Jane and then left her body in a playground. The next morning, some children made this terrible discovery. When the police saw Jane's injuries, they knew right away the same man who had killed the others had killed her too. But this time, something strange happened. The police and the newspapers talked about Jane very differently. They called her innocent and respectable, words that they had never used with the other victims. By saying this, they made it seem like the earlier victims somehow deserved less sympathy. Some people believed the Ripper had made a terrible mistake when he had decided to kill Jane McDonald. They thought he might have confused her with a prostitute because she was alone at night. This kind of talk caused a lot of anger and fear across Britain. More and more people started paying attention to this specific case. Some people who shared the police and media's unfair views were only upset because Jane seemed respectable. They showed more outrage over her death than the other women who had actually been taken out. But others finally realized the terrible truth. No woman was safe. It didn't matter if you were rich, poor, young, old, what job you had, the Ripper could strike anyone, anywhere, at any time. So, put him down like the dog he is. There was also a growing anger with the police. People were furious because the police kept blaming the victims. The police failed to catch the Ripper, and their solution was to tell women to just stay indoors at night, and if it was their fault for going outside, then that's just kind of the way it is. Douchebags. So this outrage led to something fairly powerful. In November of 1977, women across Leeds came together to end up fighting back. They held the first Reclaim the Night protest, marching through the streets. They demanded the right to be safe, not by hiding, but by standing strong. The Ripper then struck again in July of 1977, but this time something was different. The victim would end up surviving. On July 9th, a woman named Maureen Long left her home in Farsley and then traveled to Bradford for a Saturday night out in the town, like we all do. She visited a few pubs and then went dancing at a club. When the night ended, Maureen went outside to look for a taxi. Instead, a white car pulled up and offered her a ride. This was the 1970s, so things were a little different. Like, everybody's been told nowadays, like, don't get in cars with strangers or don't do XYZ. The reason you're told that is because of essentially the 60s and 70s, possibly even leaning into the 80s, of just how much stuff like this was happening that you are now told not to do. So prior to this, nobody was really told not to accept a ride from a stranger. It was just kind of like, yeah, if somebody's offering you a ride, you just sort of did it. And unfortunately, she didn't know that she was getting in the car with the Yorkshire Ripper. The driver took her to a lonely, dark place. There, he attacked Maureen, hitting her in the head with a hammer and continuing on as usual. He then dragged her out of the car and then started stabbing her, but Maureen was lucky. A dog nearby started howling loudly. Scared that someone might come, the Ripper then jumped into his car and sped away before he could finish his deadly attack. A night watchman saw the car speeding off, but didn't see Maureen just lying there. It was not until the next morning that a few women found Maureen barely alive. alive. Maureen was rushed to the hospital for emergency surgery, but right before she went in, police detectives asked her to describe her attacker. Like, I get that's like your one chance because you don't really know how the surgery's gonna go, but guys, anyways, so even though she was badly hurt, Maureen gave a strong descriptions. A white man in his mid-30s, big build, and light brown hair. This was more information than the police had ever gotten before, and there was some more good news. The night watchman remembered the car. He said it was a Ford Cortina Mark II, a type of car often used by taxi drivers. Even before Maureen long survived, some investigators also had a theory. They thought maybe the Ripper was just driving a taxi. It made sense. A taxi driver had a good reason to be out late at night. He knew the area very well and knew where to find all the prostitutes, as well as where to take them without being seen. Now, with Maureen's clues, the police were even more sure. They started investigating taxi drivers more aggressively. Before long, they found a man who seemed fairly suspicious. His name was Terry Hawkshaw. He matched the description, and he lived with his mother near where some of the murders had actually happened. And he didn't have really good alibis for the nights of the killings, so it seemed to kind of match up. The police would end up being excited about this. They watched Terry that day and then also the nights as well. They even searched his house with a warrant. But in the end, they would find nothing because Terry Hawkshaw was innocent. Meanwhile, the real Yorkshire Ripper was still roaming free, and there was another problem. The car the night watchman saw wasn't a Ford Cortina Mark II at all. It was actually a Ford Corsair. The police had chased the wrong man based on a mistake, and precious time had been lost, and the Ripper was ready to strike again. On October 1st, 1977, he went farther from his usual hunting grounds, this time all the way to Manchester. There, he met Jean Jordan, a 20-year-old woman from Scotland. Jean had run away from home and had turned to prostitution to help her family. The Ripper drove her to a dark, empty lot between some gardens and then attacked her, smashing her head over and over again with a hammer. After killing Jean, the Ripper then went home, but later he realized he had made a pretty bad mistake. He had paid her with a brand new £5 note. If someone found that bill, it could be traced back to him. But he was afraid to go back for the bill, thinking that the police might be watching. A whole week passed, and the newspapers didn't mention Jean's death. This made the Ripper feel somewhat safe. He thought the police had not found the body yet, so he decided to just go back. When he arrived, he was right. Jean's body was still there, but there was something missing, her purse. That made the Ripper angry. In a fit of rage, he grabbed a knife and began to mutilate Jean's body, slashing it again and again. And afterwards, he gave up on finding the £5 note and just left. And this dude is a complete sick puppy. So the next day, Jean's body was discovered in a more obvious spot where it couldn't have been missed. It was found by Bruce Jones, a 23-year-old dairy worker. Years later, Bruce became famous for acting on one of the popular British soap operas, Coronation Street. In an odd twist, Bruce later admitted that he was questioned by the police as a possible suspect after finding the body. But the real lead came when the police found Jean's purse. The £5 note was still inside it. The bill was traced to a bank in Shipley where it had been part of a payroll. The police had 34 possible companies to investigate. They interviewed around 5,000 workers, but no one seemed to stand out. Among the people questioned was a man named Peter Sutcliffe. He was actually questioned twice, but each time he gave a solid alibi that made the detectives trust him. Once again, the Ripper managed to escape the law. Before the year ended, the Ripper then attacked once more. On December 14th, 1977, he picked up Marilyn Moore in Leeds. He drove her to an empty lot and then attacked her, just like the others, with a violent blow to the head. But this time, something happened that saved her life. With the dog in the area barking loudly to draw attention to the scene, the Ripper was scared once again of being caught. He would flee the scene before he could finish the attack. Marilyn then survived and the Ripper slipped away once again. A kind couple then found Marilyn Moore lying badly hurt. They quickly called an ambulance, and Marilyn survived her terrifying night and was able to tell the police what had happened. She even helped them draw a sketch of her attacker, a man who had told her his name was Dave. But even with her brave efforts, the Ripper had slipped away once again. The Yorkshire Ripper was out there, starting a new year, 1978, and he was still free. After his deadliest year yet, there was no sign that this was going to stop. In fact, he became even more dangerous. In January, he claimed 2 more lives. The first victim was a 22-year-old Yvonne Pearson, killed on January 21st, but the Ripper hid the body under an old, thrown-out sofa, and she wasn't found until March. Just a week after Yvonne's death, the Ripper then struck again. He killed 18-year-old Helen Ritka. The fear across the north of England grew thicker by the day. But then, something strange happened. On March 8th, the police received a letter. It was written by someone claiming to be the Yorkshire Ripper. He bragged that while the press had called him a maniac, the police had described him as clever, and he agreed. He mocked the investigators, saying they had no idea who he was. He mentioned that a photo in the newspaper had made him nervous, but he laughed off any suggestion that he might have taken himself out. The letter went on, mocking the police for not catching him. The writer said he had no plans to stop and called himself Jack the Ripper. He also expressed one regret, that young Jane MacDonald had escaped him that night only because she changed her routine. He even claimed responsibility for 8 killings, including one from Preston in 1975. Some detectives had quietly wondered if Joanne Robinson's case had actually been one of the Ripper's work too. At first, the police thought the letter might really be from the Yorkshire Ripper. It seemed to match what they had already believed, and the killer hated prostitutes, and that Jane MacDonald's murder had been a mistake. The writer even said his next victim would be an older woman, and when that actually happened, it made police believe the letter even more. There was one thing that truly ended up convincing them, though. The writer mentioned a murder in Preston. The police thought that the detail had never really been made public, but they were wrong. Everything in the letter had already been in the news. The real clue they missed, though, was that this letter didn't mention the death of Yvonne Pearson, whose body had not been found yet. If the writer had been the real Ripper, he would have known about her. Still, the investigators, now known as the Ripper Squad, decided the letter was real. 2 more letters followed over the next year, and they believed those too. Meanwhile, the real Yorkshire Ripper was still out there free. On May 16, 1978, he would strike again. This time he killed Vera Millward in Manchester. She was 41 years old, older than most of the Ripper's other victims, just like the letter had said. But this was just a coincidence that helped the real killer stay hidden. Now, one of the things you gotta understand about people in general is you have a lot of losers out there who will write in and say these things because it gives them a sense of, I'm just gonna be completely honest, maybe like feeling important because everything else they do in life is not important. So they'll do these things because it gets a rise out of the police, or they want their letter posted in, I guess, the media, and they want to be known even if they're not known. So unfortunately for everybody, there are just complete wastes of life like this, and it's very tragic. I mean, the killer is very obviously worse, but people who do this, you're like right next to them in terms of you're a total shitbag. So after Millward's death, almost a whole year passed with no new murders. But on April 4th, 1979, the Ripper attacked again. His victim was 19-year-old Josephine Whitaker, who was walking to her grandparents' house in Halifax. When doctors examined her body, they found traces of a special kind of mineral oil, the same kind of oil that had been found on the envelopes of letters. This tricked the police fairly badly. They now believed even more that the letters were real. They thought they had a new clue because the letters had been mailed from a place called Sunderland, which is farther north than Yorkshire, where the murders had happened. It is an area called the northeast of England. In Sunderland, people are often called Geordies, and they have like a strong, different way of speaking. The police thought that this could actually help them catch the killer, and they believed if someone from Sunderland was in Yorkshire, people would notice the strange accent right away. So they told the public about it, hoping it would lead for a clue. Then in June of 1979, something else would continue to go down as it continues to unfold. Instead of another letter, the police received a cassette tape. On it, a man spoke in a thick Geordie accent, and he said his name was Jack. He told Officer George Oldfield, who was leading the hunt, that the police had no chance of catching him. He even laughed at how badly they were doing. It's not wrong, as Jack said he had been at this for 4 years and promised to kill again before the year ended, maybe in Manchester. After his chilling words, the tape ended with a clip from a song called "Thank You for Being a Friend" by Anne Gold. Police felt sure now. They believed they were hearing the real voice of the Yorkshire Ripper. Voice experts listened closely and said the speaker had a Wearside accent common around Sunderland, and they even narrowed it down to a small place called Castletown. The police went all out. They launched one of the biggest searches ever. They put up posters and billboards all across England. They ran ads in all of the newspapers, and they even opened a special phone line where people could call and listen to the tape. The Ripper's voice echoed everywhere, the malls and the supermarkets and even the nightclubs. But there was a big problem. Some of the women who had survived the Ripper's attack said he didn't sound like a Geordie at all. They said he spoke with a Yorkshire accent. Olive Smelt, one of the earliest survivors, begged police to listen. She knew the man who attacked her was from Yorkshire, not Sunderland. But the police not even being there during the attack, they didn't want to hear it because, reasons. Just remember, and I know this is England, and we've also talked about other things on this channel, you are your first usually and last line of defense. The police are there to zip up body bags. And a lot of people think the police are there to protect you. They're there to enforce the law. There is no, as long as somebody's not breaking the law, essentially, they can't really do anything also. They're there to make sure that the law is enforced. So again, on this channel, I'm pretty much of the thought of 2A is exactly what we need. As long as humanity is going to be violent, because we are violent, you need a way to protect yourself. Was it stay strapped or get clapped, essentially? So when it comes to stuff like this, that's always the conversation, right? On the one hand, absolute atrocities can be committed with handhelds, is the best way to put it. But on the other hand, you can also prevent absolute atrocities with handhelds. Double-edged sword, depends on how you use it. But anyways, so the police didn't want to hear, which is absolutely mind-boggling. They believed that the tape was the thing and nothing, not even the victims, could change their mind. We can't say for sure if the Yorkshire Ripper would have been caught earlier if the police had even been listening and not chasing the wrong man, but the shocking part of all this is after the police launched their huge search for Geordie, the real killer managed to murder 3 more women. The first was 20-year-old Barbara Leach. She was killed on September 1st, 1979, just a few months after the police got the fake tape. Holy cow, do these police suck. The next year, the Ripper then attacked 4 more women, killing 2 of them, Marguerite Walls and Jacqueline Hill. None of these women were prostitutes. Marguerite was a government worker, while Barbara and Jacqueline were students. Even with the new pattern, the police refused to change their plan. What the hell? They still believed they were hunting a Geordie or Geordie or whatever. I don't even know how you're supposed to call these guys. Anyways, in early of 1981, the story then took a big turn. The Yorkshire Ripper was finally caught, but it wasn't because of clever detective work, because that was so clever. It was just dumb luck and open-minded police work that led to his arrest. Who would have guessed? This time, the killer had gone to Sheffield in South Yorkshire to find a new victim. He thought it would be safer there, and instead, it became his downfall. He picked up a 24-year-old woman named Olivia Rivers and was driving her to a quiet spot when a police car pulled him over. The officers arrested him when they realized his car had fake number plates. At first, the man reacted like really calm. He's like, oh, whatever. He even threw away his weapons, a hammer, a knife, and a rope, by pretending he needed to use the bathroom. But the police grew suspicious. His shoe size matched, his blood type matched, and he looked just like the descriptions the survivors had given. But you know, he didn't have a Sunderland accent, so we just let him go. God, idiots. Anyways, he even lived near the places where the murders happened. Okay, I'm not going to steal Wendigoon's statement on this, so I am quoting Wendigoon when I say this. Basically, the police didn't want to search the skeleton pile even though everybody was pointing at it, and then finally they searched the skeleton pile and they found skeletons. That is quite literally what is going on with this. Look, hindsight's 2020. I get it. And maybe I'm being a little too critical here because I didn't live during this time frame. But guys, get it together. So the only thing, though, that didn't match was his accent. He had a Yorkshire accent, not a Geordie one. Luckily, the Sheffield police didn't care about the accent, thank God. They went back to the spot where they arrested him and found the weapons he had thrown away. It was all the proof that they needed. They had finally caught the Yorkshire Ripper, Peter Sutcliffe. When the public found out who Peter Sutcliffe really was, they were furious. It turned out the police had already interviewed him 9 times before his final arrest. He was even one of the men who had received money from the same payroll batch as the £5 note near Jean Jordan's body. That is some bang-up police work, guys. He literally matched the survivor descriptions. He had been seen many times in the red light areas of Leeds. One of his own friends, Trevor Birdsall, had even warned the police that Sutcliffe might be the killer, but every clue had been ignored. That's when you just line up the police force. You say, hey, thank you for your negligence. You're all fired. And it's just because Peter didn't sound like a Geordie or Geordie. I don't know what it's called. My God. So as for the man who had tricked the police with fake letters and fake tape, he became known as the Wareside Jack, or just an asshole. His real name was John Humble, or a dick. He wasn't caught until 2005, and he was sent to prison for 8 years for lying to the police and helping the real Ripper stay free longer. No, what helped the real Ripper stay free longer was the police. So at his trial, Peter Sutcliffe tried to claim he wasn't fully responsible for his actions. He said that he killed because he heard the voice of God. Pretty sure God isn't going to tell you to do that. His lawyers then said he had a mental illness, called him a paranoid schizophrenic, and then tried to get him sent to a mental hospital instead of prison, which there's a misnomer about this where people are like, oh, I'll just pretend like I'm crazy and then go to a mental hospital. Mental hospital's just as bad as prison, dude, especially if you're sent there for like doing what you did. it's not as great place where it's like, oh, well, we have tea time at 4 and then we're going to go play badminton later. No, it's just as bad. But the judge and jury, they didn't believe him, thank God. Peter Sutcliffe was found guilty of murder and then sent to spend the rest of his life in prison behind bars. Or how about this? Maybe a little barbaric, But then again, I'm only me, and there's maybe a little bit of caveman DNA in me. How about tie him up, and then the family members who lost people because of this douche, they get a whole 24 hours with them. Sure, he wouldn't survive, and he doesn't need to, and taxpayers don't need to keep him alive. But in the end, it wasn't justice or revenge that finished him. It was an illness. On November 13th, 2020, Peter Sutcliffe died after catching the coronavirus, ironically enough, taking his dark secrets with him to the grave. All right, so now we reach the point where I kind of talk to you directly. Again, one of the things you need to understand, and I get, like, everybody's got different opinions on handhelds and the functional use of them, or if we should have them. I understand that, and if you want to talk about that respectfully in the comments, please do so. My own personal belief is that in a defensive manner, which is typical to this, what is it? God made men and women of different strengths, but Samuel Colt made us all equal. I'm paraphrasing, but that is this situation in general is one of the best examples of why that might be a good thing to have on you at all times, because people are evil. There's evil people out there, there's cruel people out there, there's people with issues, and it's one of those situations where a lot of things could have been different. A lot of things could have been different if the police had done their job properly too. So, and I'm not bashing police. A lot of police are overtaxed as far as their time. There's a lot going on, I get that. But to have that many examples of why you should take a look at this other guy and then not do it, that's like criminal negligence at that point. That's infuriating to know about this now. I cannot stand that police force of that time. Anyhow, so I think we're gonna end that there. Always watch yourself, watch your surroundings, never take anything from strangers, that type of deal, and just, have a way to defend yourself. I'm gonna wrap that pepper spray at minimum. Works beautifully. You spray that in somebody's eyes, it doesn't matter how angry they are. You're going down. Taser, also fantastic. That way it's a non-lethal thing and you can still defend yourself because you are your first and last line of defense in a lot of situations. But all right, I'm gonna end that there. Thank you guys for watching. I don't think any of these are really enjoyable topics, but an interesting topic to listen to. So it may change your ideas on some things that you believe or don't believe, or it may just make you aware of what the world actually is. Because the world, while there's a lot of safety in it, there's also a lot of people like this. There's more people than you think who are exactly like this. And you just never know when one of them's gonna snap. So anyways, thank you for watching. I wanna thank my patrons real quick. At the Literal Wendigo tier, we have Grayson West, Invictus Echo. What's going on, bro? Michigan Dogman, Monkey Man, and Scrungle. Thank you guys for your awesome support. At the Eyewitness the Event tier, we have Beaver Malaga and Dragon Master Knight. Thank you guys. At the secondhand accounts tier, we have Bianca, Crippling Depression Gaming, Fred Rush, Stutz, and Troy. And to the rest of my patrons, I do appreciate y'all's support as well. It goes a long way towards helping out, so thank you. You guys are absolute ballers. But all right, that's gonna do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and we'll see y'all in the next one.